Welcome to the show. My name is Charlton with Big C. This is Charlton and Big C Sports, coming to you worldwide on the Big C Sports Network, on the #1 network in the United States of America. And Big C Sports has been voted the #1 sports show in the universe, according to Big C. And them good old boys down south, I want to say bienvenidos to all of our listeners in Latin America, also across the pond in London, England, as well as Paris, France. Of course, you good old boys in Canada. We love you in Africa, the Big C tribe. But there's no one we love more than the good old boys down south in the land of the free and the home of the brave on a beautiful December the 19th, 2019. Ground Deportes Big C is on travel mode and on the West Coast. I hope that he didn't get washed away by the tidal waves. I told you, be careful out there laying on the beach, Big C. You don't want to sleep on the beach, but it's all fair and love and war. I want to say today's show is sponsored by your Northern California Cadillac dealers, home of the all-new Cadillac Escalade, the standard of the world. And when you go by and test drive yours, tell them Charlton and Big C sent you. And also, I want to tell you that Big C Sports is powered by Google and Alexa. Just say Google or Alexa, play Big C Sports Podcast, and you'll hear from our sponsors. You'll hear welcome to the show. I will introduce Big C as the Mystic, and he'll do his thing. And I really appreciate the way things are going with Big C Sports. You can also follow Big C Sports on Xfinity, Comcast Television, launching on Roku TV, Apple TV, Fire TV, and a lot of smart TVs all over the universe. I want to bring up also something that's very important this time of year. You know, a lot of people are out trying to find gifts. They're shopping and spending money and hopefully trying to make someone happy with a gift. I think a gift should come from the heart more so than a box, just my opinion. But there are people who are also going through issues. We always pay homage to our military veterans. We have a national suicide hotline. A lot of people are using this line. We've seen it on ABC News, Drew Stephanopoulos, Michael Strahan. Also on CNN News with Don Lemon. And a lot of other people too. Big C brought it up many, many moons ago. 800-273-8255. That's 800-273-8255. Or you can text 838-255. That's 838-255. And hopefully they can get some help. Also, I want to mention that Big C Sports acknowledged as one of the top podcasts and the iHeartRadio network. Really appreciate that going forward. I want to just touch on some things that have been happening in the world of sports, and maybe it skips our mind. I know we've talked so much about high school football and all of the things that people really love about high school sports and how it really connects people. We know that sports is a billion-dollar industry, and boys and girls sports is the foundation to this billion-dollar industry, and they know that there's a lot more money going into it. But more and more, as I was talking to Big C about something that's near and dear to my heart, is why so many players on the athletic side anyway from California are going south to play at southern universities, usually the Southeastern Conference, or in the I won't say as much the ACC, but there are a lot the ACC Conference, Atlantic Coast Conference, and then even some kids are going to the Big 12, which is the Southwest, as opposed to just staying in California for their sports. And it reminds me of something. I just want to pay respect to the gentleman, the late Herman Boone, the legendary high school football coach, portrayed in the movie by Denzel Washington. The movie was called Remember the Titans. Well, he passed away at 84 years old. He took over as head coach of T.C. Williams High School in Alexandria, Virginia. That was 1971. That year, the city's high schools were consolidated and integrated, led by Boone, who was an African-American coach, and assistant coach Bill Yost, who was a Caucasian man. The Titans overcame a lot of racial tension to go undefeated and win a state championship. Former T.C. Williams principal John Porter informed the school Wednesday of Boone's passing, and the school's football boosters club announced it on Twitter. Now, obviously, we think about how that movie, it really opened up a lot of, I guess, thoughts, also a lot of wounds in a lot of people. And people don't understand that, of course, Herman Boone was a trailblazer, but it was not a movie for him the way it was for Denzel Washington. Everybody knows Denzel Washington. Remember the Titans. I think we've seen him in Glory. We've seen Denzel Washington in so many things. Mo Better Blues, I really appreciate his role as Malcolm X with his great Spike Lee director. I thought that was an amazing, show. But I go back to the reason that I'm talking about this is because Big C and I always go back and forth about who has the best competition. Is it the southern schools or is it the northern schools? And oftentimes it's left to the eye of the beholders. It's all perception. And I've never lived in the South. I've only lived out here on the West Coast. So near and dear to my heart, especially when it comes to student athletes, I have a son and daughter that are here on the West Coast. Daughter just graduated from the West Coast school. Son will be going to a college on the West Coast in high school now. But when I think about what happened in the movie Remember the Titans and the legendary coach that passed on, and this goes right into why so many student athletes are going south. Just my opinion, Big C, but sometimes I don't know until I read about it. Well, on the eve of the 60th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education, there's an article that I pulled up in reading from 2014, and it's called Brown versus Board of Education, also Brown versus Board of Topeka, decision that can be no complacency in California when it comes to achieving integrated schools. And people say, what's this have to do with sports? When the colleges come looking for young black athletes, for the most part, they're not looking for someone to go into math and science and the arts. They're looking for guys that are big, strong, and fast so they can come play for your university and help you make a lot of money. It's even going into the high school level. Big C and I were talking about why is Geico a sponsor for a high school bowl game? It's because of money. If you think about people who need insurance, well, Geico gets people at all levels, and I'm not knocking Geico. They're going to make money like anybody else. But when you're a parent, you're insuring kids in high school too. So when you go to the bowl games, and the schools are perpetuating bowl games, and they have a national sponsor, advertising works when people see your product. But a compelling, and this is for you, Big C, when you keep saying that kids are going south because they have 100,000 seat stadiums, they're putting tens of millions of dollars into the athletic programs for weight rooms and TVs and whatever it is to make it more comfortable. Different uniforms. Oregon started that, and they're one of the higher recruiting schools on the West Coast, taking kids out of California. But think back to 2014, and people can Google this too. They can read about it in papers. They can Google it. But it was done. The great UCLA did this study. And so I want people to just keep this in mind. I think a lot of it is about culture. A compelling new report from UCLA's Civil Rights Project. This is in Westwood, which is very segregated. But you think of UCLA as an integrated school, but Westwood is very segregated, especially compared to South Central Los Angeles, where USC sits. So California's future, they're segregating California's future, describes how California, the Golden State, leads the nation in the disproportionate enrollment of black and Latino students in schools with few white students. Now think about that. Because if you did not see the great UCLA, Lou Alcindor, of course, and all the great football players that have played there, Ken Norton Jr., we've seen so many. And, of course, USC from Mike Garrett, O.J. Simpson, going all the way through the Junior Seau, Reggie Bush. We've had so many great players. So why are the players leaving and going south now when they used to come to California? Juju Smith-Schuster plays for the Pittsburgh Steelers now. And there's a lot of players that have played in California, and now they're going to the South, Big C. But this study that was done on segregating California's future, the reality is that it undercuts the self-image of California being an open and a progressive state, admitting or committing to the advancing opportunities for all the residents. And that's according to the report's authors. His name is Gary Orfield. You can Google it. Orfield, a former Harvard professor who moved the Civil Rights Project to UCLA from Harvard. And that was done in, I want to say, 2014. And he had a lot of things that he brought to fruition that to be honest with you, I was not really aware of what was going on. Because I know that everybody in California is considering that California is very progressive. From Northern California to Southern California is a very progressive state. I think a lot of people want opportunity. When opportunity is there, you go to college to get an education. But we know And it's amazing how you and I talk about things and they tend to come to fruition, Big C. That's why I keep asking for that $100 million. That's coming to fruition also. But I really want to tie in when you ask me why kids are leaving California and they're going south to schools. And I think it's because of some of the reasons. And I know people only want to know who won a game, but it's important to me. The notion that California, whether it's wittingly or unwillingly, is not perpetuating but creating separate and unequal schools is hard to grasp, especially we're considered the progressive state. But these are all of the other white or black schools in California and all over the country. They're no longer segregated. However, there's a thing called redistricting. When you redistrict people, some people call it gerrymandering for voting. It's a different kind of segregation in which black and Latino kids are overwhelmingly concentrated in under-financed schools with few or in some cases no white students. Now, people may find that hard to believe, but it's not that hard to believe when you read about it. Some of the segregation is the result of transformed racial and ethnic makeup of our schools. We've heard of white flight, where the new thing that we're hearing now for pro sports teams, and Big C always says, why are there a lot of major colleges in California like USC, it's not on campus, the college is not on campus, but it's right by campus. And then the Pasadena, the Rose Bowl, is nowhere near Westwood. But think about this. Some of the separation is a result of the transformed racial and ethnic makeup of our schools, which makes integrating schools across the state virtually impossible. Whites comprise 25%. Think about this number. As a group, whites comprise only 25% of the state of California's public school enrollment, compared to 80% in 1968. That's when the integration began, and that's what led to what's called white flight. And you say, well, how does that make any sense? And this may not be 100% true, but we've even seen a lot of stadiums, like the 49ers moved out of South San Francisco, Hunters Point area, down to Santa Clara. But that's where their headquarters is. But that's where they also put their stadium. There's not nearly the same amount of diversity in Santa Clara as there is in South San Francisco. And I don't know if the Raiders are any indication of this study, but the Raiders are in Oakland. For the most part, Oakland is one of the more integrated cities in Northern California. And then moving to Las Vegas. Now, I know that's about money. Someone gives you $1 billion, you probably move to Las Vegas too. But Las Vegas is not as integrated as Oakland. So it's not necessarily moving out to the suburbs the way the 49ers did, but it is moving away from a culture where people are more able to interact, and I think that affects integration also. And so when you wonder why a lot of kids are going from the West Coast and they're going south, I think a lot of it may have to be culture. Why do I bring that up? I think it's so important because later I'm going to get into the top 25 high school players that were recruited to go to schools primarily in the South. So when you think about what I'm going to bring up, and I want people to Google everything I say, because if I'm not credible, you'll know about it now. You don't have to wait 6 years or whatever it takes for you to figure it out. School integration in the United States. Think about this. An integrated classroom in Anacostia High School, Washington, D.C. in 1957 dealt with integration in the United States, and the process also known as desegregation, in ending some schools in the United States were integrated before the mid-20th century. The first ever, think about this when we think about progressive states, and we know that the Commonwealth, Lowell High School in Boston, Massachusetts, that was the first school to integrate the United States. I didn't know that. That's important to know that. And when you think about that, we think about Harvard, you think about University of Massachusetts. There's a lot of good educational programs in Boston. But then as you come to the West Coast, and again, it goes back to that question Big C says, why are so many, and the Pac-12 needs to hear this, they can follow Big C Sports, why are so many schools in California not able to recruit the top athletes? And for the most part, those athletes are African American. That you can Google that too when you watch them line up to play football and basketball. For the most part, they're African American. and those kids are leaving the Golden State. I didn't know that segregation was an issue here until I kept asking, and Big C and I were talking. He kept asking, why are so many people leaving California? Why are so much of the top black talent, and maybe some of the white talent not as much, but why the top black talent is leaving California to go down south? Well, I want to bring up something else that people can Google. If you recall the Democratic debates, and Kamala Harris was talking to Joe Biden about the issue of busing. Joe Biden said he thought it should be a state matter. Kamala Harris said no, it should be a national matter, because it's a matter of the federal government. Because and think about how prescient she was when she said that. That was 1968. Kamala Harris was age 6, while Berkeley, the city of Berkeley, right in the East Bay, north of Oakland, east of San Francisco. When you cross the Bay Bridge, you're coming in pretty much Berkeley area. While Berkeley had only gone to one public high school at Berkeley at that time, meaning it was relatively racially integrated. The city's middle schools and elementary schools were largely split, but they were along racial lines. So when you have the landmark, racial integration going on all over the United States, I want people to think about this because it's so important. When Big C asked, why are so many kids, top athletes in California, leaving the West Coast, going south? And I want people you can Google this. I think it's culture. I used to say, well, it's because it's TV. They're not seeing their programs on TV as much. I was saying they're kicking off at 8 o'clock and 7:30 at nighttime. And people, when you're a college kid at 8 o'clock, you're getting ready to go out and have a party with your friends. You're studying or going to a party, especially on a Saturday night. You're not trying to go to a football game that's going to end at 11 o'clock midnight or 10:30. That was my belief, but I started reading more, which I've been encouraging more people to do. So 1968, Berkeley, California became the first city in the United States of America with a population of 100,000 or more to integrate its public schools fully from kindergarten through high school. Berkeley, California did that. Berkeley's known as a very progressive city. I don't think many people can find more progressive cities in California or maybe anywhere than Berkeley. But you also go back to Boston, Massachusetts, which has been known to be very racially segregated, especially a lot of athletes had a lot of issues dealing with segregation in integrated areas in Boston, especially neighborhoods. Yeah, people will come out and love you as an athlete, but as far as moving into their neighborhood, it created a lot of white flight, even in highly educated cities like Boston, Massachusetts. So from Berkeley to Boston, I think what we're seeing, and I don't know if people really understand how deep it is, in California, there's been so much what we call white flight, even though we have integration. I was doing a study today. I also work in the real estate industry, so I was working around and at a meeting with one of the top real estate companies in California, but really in the country. And of the meeting that had maybe 200 people, I only saw 2 African Americans, myself when I looked in the mirror, and there was another gentleman who was there. Out of about 200 attendants, they were all Caucasian, maybe some Hispanic. Could have been 2 or 3 Hispanic. That's just what I saw with my eyes. I didn't ask someone what was their DNA. I didn't ask where they were from and what ethnic group do you identify with. But I saw that in real estate. Now you say, okay, well, why does that matter? Well, when you're trying to buy a house and someone's trying to sell you a home, for the most part, people just find their own tribe, especially in this climate. They look for people who look like them. So I was asking myself, just my own self-think, and I'm saying it out loud to people who may or may not relate to this, and I think a lot of times we find it in media also. If you canceled every sports program in the United States of America, every single one of them, from ESPN, from Fox Sports, CBS Sports, ABC Sports, NBC Sports, whatever sports show. Well, Big C Sports is black-owned. It's not that we're discriminating, but we created our own platform, and we happen to be on a lot of platforms. But if you were to cancel every sports program, broadcast, TV, and radio show in the United States of America, a lot of the African Americans that you see on TV now, or that you hear on the radio or a podcast like what I'm doing, you would not hear from them. They would not get the jobs, predominantly would not get the jobs in, headlining the news as an anchor, like the great Bernie Shaw did back in the day for CNN. They would not be that leading anchor. In fact, there's Lester Holt now that does a lot of anchoring that's on television that we can see now. But outside of him, there's Gayle King. She's on every now and then as a leading anchor. There's Michael Strahan. He's a co-anchor, but he's not a leading anchor. And that's in the ABC, I believe, morning show. And there's others that are speckled across TV. There's Whoopi Goldberg. She's on. She's one of the 4 women on a national show. There's Don Lemon. CNN does a great job. There's Frederica Whitfield. I think she does a great job also. She's an African-American woman that you'll see on TV at times. And there's many other, but not a consistently every day or 5 days a week African-American host of shows. You just don't see that as much. And again, if you took off the sporting segment, would you even see African-Americans on TV more than, say, 5%, when we make up at least 13 to 14% of the United States population? So why am I going into that? I think in order to know, like what I learned today in real estate, there are things called projections. You got to project where things are going to be in the future. In the future, real estate, just like cars, will be sold by people going online and purchasing properties. They won't need a person to do an open house as much. They may always need a human being somewhere along the line. But most people are going online to search for properties. They're not going into a real estate office, and real estate brokers can attest to this. They're not going into your office. They're going online to find properties that are up for sale. And then when they find properties that are up for sale, they'll contact that company, which is oftentimes it's a call center. And that call center might be located outside of the United States of America, but it rings to a local office in their area. I'm just saying what I learned today, and a lot of people in real estate can attest to that. So by the time a client wants to get a house, they can go online. There are a lot of companies that they can go online, and some of them here are sponsor our show. They'll get their loan qualification, they'll get their pre-approval, and they have it in their hand. They're dealing by emailing documents and what they call e-signing. It means someone's not coming to your house to get your signatures. They're doing e-signing, and they're going to the title company, and they're buying their house that way. So that's kicking a lot of the brokers out of the business, unless they join the electronic society. And a big thing I've talked about, artificial intelligence, taking away about 35% of the jobs over the next 15 years. I mean, it's happening as we speak. So going back to when Big C said, why are so many players, talented top players, African-American players, going to the South to get a college education and play sports, when the West Coast is known as a progressive state? And I think it's culture. And when I hear more people talk about wanting a charter school, they're trying to do that so they don't have to go to the public schools that are, for the most part, integrated and underfunded. And that goes back to Brown versus Board of Education and Plessy versus Ferguson. There's always been a pushback when it came to integrating schools. And I think, again, it's not just Big C saying that. There's a study done by Gary Orfield, a former Harvard professor, and he moved the Civil Rights Project to UCLA. This was done in 2014. I want people to Google that because it talks about segregating California's future. And I just want people to know that if we don't understand our history, then it's due to repeat itself. And as we all talk about, we want an integrated society. Not everybody, but for the most part, that's what people say publicly. What they say behind closed doors, I don't know. But that's something to keep in mind. And it's important to me because we talked about the late Herman Boone, the legendary high school football coach, portrayed by the great Denzel Washington, Academy Award winner, in the movie Remember the Titans. And he passed away at age 84, and he took over as head coach at T.C. Williams High School in Alexandria, Virginia, of all places, in 1971. Now, we know the first slave ships landed in 1619 in Virginia. Isn't that something? The first slave ships arrived from the Middle Passage, from Africa, the west coast of Africa to the east coast of the United States, in Virginia, 1619, and in an integrated high school in Virginia, one of the first in the country, in 1971. And to me, that played sports. That's something that is ironic. It happened both in Virginia. So I wanted to bring that to conclusion because I was telling Big C, I thought it was more about lack of TV exposure. And Big C will say no, is because they have more people to play in the front of. Well, I think we're both part right, but not completely right. Yeah, if you're not on TV, then you're not going to be seen. That's why everybody advertises on TV. Whether you're buying food, it's on TV. Whether you're buying clothing, it's on television. The holidays are here. Almost everything you see is on television. So if it's on television, you see it enough, the reticular activating signal in our system, in our brain starts working, and you tend to go out and buy what you see a lot. So to tie in integration or diminishing integration, unless you play sports, you don't see a lot of it. Even in neighborhoods, I challenge people. Walk outside, just walk around your block, if you will, and see how many people you see that don't look like you in your neighborhood. If you're African American and you live in a neighborhood, you're going to find, for the most part, you're going to find it more integrated, or you'll be one of the few. It won't be as integrated. And if you're mainstream, middle-class Caucasian, do the same thing. Walk outside of your neighborhood, even when you say you believe in integration and you believe in liberty and justice for all, and you're not racist and you don't have a color, you don't see color, you just see people. Subconsciously, where do you choose to live? Irrespective of whether it's a multi-million-dollar neighborhood or a middle-class neighborhood, most people choose to live with their own tribe. And I'm not saying there's anything right or wrong about that. I'm just saying that's also happening in colleges. So my conclusion, and I'm open to being wrong, is young people of color, when they go on the recruiting trips in California, if you're just be honest, if you're trying to go to Westwood and play football at UCLA and you're a top-of-the-line African-American athlete, UCLA is located in a city in Westwood. There's not a lot of diversity in Westwood. There's just not. Now, Southern California, there is. When you're in the heart of South Central Los Angeles and a lot of the suburbs of downtown LA, you're going to find a lot of integration and a lot of people that interact together. So you'll see it there. But it's just the fact that it's something that I want people to pay attention to. And Big C is kind of just a testament to what you and I talk about. How do we make sure that we want to be the vanguards of helping people understand that integration is important, that opportunity, everybody wants opportunity. And in order to know, you got to keep your mind open. What I don't like seeing in a lot of programs, and it's just my opinion, everybody can do their show the way they want to. People don't have to like the way I do it, and they don't have to like the way that Big C Sports does it either. But when I hear, or when I turn on TV, and for the most part, the African-American men, and people can say whether or not the producers of it, I'm just going to make a statement. You can say what you want to say about it. Some people don't like how I do my show. But I think I would just ask people to pause a little bit, and when you have a show, and they'll have 4 or 5 people on the panel, and for the most part, they're shouting each other down to say, I'm right, you're wrong. You don't know what you're talking about, and I do. I know more than you do. You don't know nothing. Let me explain to you. Let me explain some things to you. Imagine a grown man saying, let me explain something to another grown man. Very condescending. But I hate that. But a lot of people do that. And I just ask you, Google it. Even if you're on sports brethren, we can have agreement and disagreement. But at the same time, just because you shout louder, it doesn't mean you're right. Sometimes it means you're intellectually vapid and you cannot elucidate a subject. So you have to shout people down. And the louder you shout, the more you want your voice to be heard. But that means you're not listening. And I would just hope that all of us could just pull back a little bit, like Big C says, pump your brakes, and really look at why a lot of our young black talent is choosing to go to the South instead of the West Coast. A lot of the major cities out here, we have segregated cities. We have people that is called white flight. And I think down South, a number of reasons, I'm not saying only, is more affordable. If you're in the Bay Area or living by Westwood or Stanford, it's hard to buy a house when the average house is about $1 million. And sometimes when your houses cost $1 million and it costs $3,000 to rent a 1-bedroom apartment, you're probably going to bypass going to that college football game to see Stanford play UCLA. So you're not going to have 100,000 people. Cost of living's gone up. When those stadiums were packed, Stanford's old stadium had 84,000. Well, the cost of living was more affordable. Same thing with USC, UCLA. 20 years ago, when they would sell out a lot, the cost of living, you could buy a house, decent house, for $500,000. I mean, that's still expensive. especially in the South. If you're in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, average house is not $500,000. It's definitely not $1 million. So that is also a part. I really love what they're talking about, but I'm going to take what's called the Big C timeout, also known as the Big C pause. I'm going to take the Big C timeout, and I'm going to come back, and I want to finish talking about this, and then I want to get into talking about where some of the top high school prospects are going to play football in the South. We'll take the Big C timeout. We'll come right back in just a moment, and we hope that you'll come back and join us. All right, we are back from the Big C timeout, also known as the Big C pause, and you can follow Big C Sports 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on the #1 podcast network in the universe, iHeartRadio podcast. You can follow Big C Sports on Apple Podcasts. You can follow Big C Sports on Google Podcasts. You can follow Big C Sports on Speaker.com. The apps that I really love are by Google and Alexa. Just say Google or Alexa, play Big C Sports Podcast. You'll hear from our sponsors. You'll hear Welcome to the Show. I will introduce Big C as the Mystic, and he will do his thing, and I really appreciate the way things are going with Big C Sports. Also, you can follow Big C Sports Xfinity Comcast Television, launching on Roku TV, Apple TV, Fire TV, and a lot of smart TVs all over the universe, and we really thank you for all of your support. I want to just, before I get a little bit more into these top high school football players and why the migration is going south, I think it's a culture. And I think you can Google the articles that I talked about California is segregating even more. Big C, you talked about that before too, but it's happening. I want to just take a little bit of time to pay homage to a gentleman that opened a lot of doors at the college ranks for a lot of men of color. Hayden Fry, a Texas native who revived the University of Iowa football and became a Hawkeye State institution over 2 decades as a Big Ten coach. He passed away. He was 90 years old. The Fry's family announced through the University of Iowa that the former head coach had passed away on Tuesday, and his family at his side in a long battle with cancer. Don't ever give up. We can't ever give up. We got to find a way to fight cancer better. But he'd been living in the Dallas area with his wife, Shirley, and they were proud to know that their father's life had a positive influence on so many people, especially a lot of men of color, too. And it's just amazing. When you think about Fry, a native of Eastland, Texas, had never been to Iowa before taking over the Hawkeyes program. That was 1979. He was hired by then athletic director Bump Elliott, who also passed away, passed away this month in December. So just, the world has lost some men that have opened doors for people and made life better for them. And I just, hope their families can just remember the good things they did. Oftentimes, we don't really pay enough attention to that. So I want to just get on to this thing that I was talking to Big C about. When you talk about how many players are leaving the north, or they're going south, or from the west coast going south, I'm just going to bring up some of the top 25 players that were, according to USA Today magazine, that went to schools around the country, and you can just figure out for yourself where they went. Number one, there's a guy by the name of Brian Brees. Damascus, Maryland. He's a defensive tackle, 6'5", 290 pounds. He went to Clemson. Now, you would think Maryland is as diverse as any place in the country, but then maybe not as much as a smaller town. And so a kid went south. Physically imposing guy, great at passing, has quickness, and he's an explosive player. And it's just amazing as a defensive tackle, 6'5", 290 pounds, a high school player. There's some NFL players that don't have that kind of size. Here's another guy, Jordan Birch, Hammond School, Columbia, South Carolina, defensive end, 6'5", 250. Staying home, going to South Carolina. A lot of athleticism. He's good on his feet, can get to the quarterback. And as I come to the #1 high school quarterback in the United States of America, we're coming out to the West Coast, which is why I'm doing this show today. I know Big C's still traveling, but doing this show and talking about what Big C is always asking me. And I want other people to ask themselves this question. Why are so many top talented high school players leaving California, where they used to go to USC, UCLA, Cal, Berkeley? Stanford's more difficult to get into. Berkeley's difficult also. They would go to Fresno State, San Diego State. But why are they going south? And I think a lot of it has to do with the culture also. St. John Bosco, Bellflower, California. The California State High School Football Champions, large school champions. Also defending, they're called the national champions, based on who they played and how many teams they've beaten outside of California. And in California, they knocked off Mater Dei of Santa Ana. Defending two-time national champion was Mater Dei. They're in the same league called the Trinity League, which is the LA area, LA Orange County. That's USC, UCLA territory. He's 6'4", 240 pounds. He's going to Clemson. That study that I talked about the segregation happening in California again, and because we see a lot of African Americans on TV playing sports, we think it's very integrated. If you look up and down the state of California at the football programs right now, before the end of the season's over, we have 4 NFL football teams. We have the Oakland Raiders, which will be moving to Las Vegas. The San Francisco 49ers. They moved out of more integrated San Francisco down to Santa Clara. We have the Los Angeles Chargers, came up from San Diego. They're out in Carson now, and they're going to be going to Inglewood. And then you have the LA Rams that came back home after going away to St. Louis for about 2 decades. Those are the 4 teams in California, and for the most part, their stadiums are built around major cities, and we know that has to be the case. But California kids going outside, DJ Ukulele, he has a gun for an arm, a rifle for an arm. I think he reminds me of Randall Cunningham, and a little bit bigger and stronger. But his mobility in the pocket allows him to keep plays alive and create. But he's taken his act south to Clemson. Now, St. John Bosco is also one of those private schools that can go out and recruit players. They had 36 Division I recruits on this 2019 football team. You don't get that by getting players from your neighborhood. They come from all over Southern California. Here's another player, Justin Flo. Upland High School in California. He's a linebacker. He's 6'2", 230 pounds. I just mentioned the quarterback, DJ Ukulele, the #1 quarterback prospect in the country at 6'5", 240. He's a lot bigger than a linebacker that's also an all-state All-American. Justin Flo from Upland High School in California, linebacker, 6'2", 230. Now he's going to Oregon. Oregon's not the South. Eugene is not as integrated as Los Angeles. But there's something about why he's going up north. Maybe smaller town. Oregon has his pulse on something. They got a lot of kids out of California. He's arguably the most feared linebacker in the country. He combines size and agility. He can stop the run. He can cover the pass. He's not as big as a quarterback, but he's one of the most imposing players that's coming out of California. I also want to mention just a couple other players. His name is Julian Fleming from Southern Columbia, Catawissa, Pennsylvania, wide receiver. And he's a kid, obviously, that has all the talent and skill that a lot of colleges want. And he's going to be taking his act to Ohio State. That's not in the South. But the thing was, why are so many kids from the West Coast going south? But kids are going to go where they want to go. This kid runs a 4.3 40. Is 6'2", 200 pounds. 4.3 40 high school. That's amazing. Zach Evans, North Shore High School, Houston, Texas, running back, 6 feet, 200 pounds. Now, he's a Southern kid, Southwest. He's considering Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Texas A&M, and Texas. And so that's just a part of what's going on around California. There's a guy, Miles Murphy, out of Hillgrove, Powder Springs, Georgia, defensive end, 6'5", 275, going to Clemson. Savell Smalls, Kennedy Catholic, Burien, Washington. So he's staying on the West Coast. A linebacker, 6'3", 230, going to the University of Washington. He has a lot of speed. He runs a 4.6, which is what you expect for high school players, but 6'3", 230 is really laying it down. There's a kid by the name of Elias Ricks, IMG Academy, Bradenton in Florida. He's a cornerback, 6'2", 190, going to LSU. There's another player that I think a lot of people will start hearing more about in the world of college football, Paris Johnson Jr., Princeton, Cincinnati. He's offensive tackle. He's 6'7", Big C, 290 pounds. Now, Anthony Munoz played at Cincinnati Moeller. This guy's at Princeton, Cincinnati, going to Ohio State. He's known for his size, ability to just get off of blocks, and he's just an amazing player who opened up a lot of holes. And here's another player that's considered the #2 quarterback in the country, Bryce Young, out of Santa Ana Mater Dei. He's 6 feet 185. If you want to know what he plays like, just pick up tape of Russell Wilson for the Seattle Seahawks, and that's who he is. He's dangerous, whether he's running the ball or throwing the ball. He led Mater Dei to 2 national championships on the high school level, playing the best competition from Florida, also Washington, D.C. and New Jersey. Just a lot of great athletes. There's another kid, Kylie Ringo, Seguro High School, Scottsdale, Arizona, cornerback, 6'2", 208 pounds. He's considering Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Texas, and Southern California. He's a lockdown corner and easy to cover receivers with his size and speed. Again, some of the schools considering, only one's from the West Coast, only Southern California. You would think maybe he'd look at Arizona State or Arizona, but he's looking at Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, and Texas, as well as Southern Cal, and maybe they'll get him to land in Southern California. So that's, for the most part, a lot of the players that are in the top 15, and there's many more. There's a kid, Darrell, his name is Darnell Washington, out of Desert Pines, Las Vegas, a tight end. He's 6 feet 8, 250 pounds. He's considering schools like Alabama, Auburn, LSU, Miami, and Florida. Not one West Coast school out of Desert Pines, Las Vegas. Again, I'm not saying the ethnic makeup of these kids, but I'm not saying that, but you might be able to draw somewhat of a conclusion. A lot of the top athletes are African American. Not all of them, but a lot of the top ones are. And so I just want people to know, when we talk about why are people leaving California and going south, I think a lot of it's culture. It's so expensive to live here. If you're a college kid and you go to a major university, you get a scholarship, yeah, so that's great. At the same time, you still got to go around the community when you're off campus. In some places, they don't have that openness. They may not feel welcome. A lot of communities are still segregated. Yes, even in California. There's another player. This guy's he's an amazing athlete. C.J. Stroud, Rancho Cucamonga, California. He's a quarterback, 6'3", 195 pounds. He's going to Ohio State, 6'3", 195. That's about the size John Elway was when he played down at Granada Hills. He's a skilled passer, very precise on his passes. He can throw the deep ball as well as a short pass. His time is impeccable, but he's going out of the state of California. And I'm not saying there's more culture in Columbus than there is if he were to go to USC or UCLA, but the cost of living, whether it's USC, UCLA, or Stanford, is a lot more expensive than if you were to live in the Midwest or Columbus, or even if you go down to Tuscaloosa. Now, here's an interesting choice. Chris Braswell, St. Francis Academy, Baltimore, Maryland. I saw them play a game against Mater Dei. Mater Dei is the only school to beat this team since 2016. Defensive end is 6'3", 220 pounds. He's leaving the Northeast going to Alabama. He's quick off the ball. He has a great blend of size and agility. Kid's amazing, but he's going south. So everybody has their own opinion as to why. I don't think they're choosing it because of the stadiums. I think there's a lot of things with culture that a lot of people are dealing with. There's also a kid out of California, Kendall Milton. He's out of Buchanan High School in Clovis, California. He's 6'1", 210 pounds. He's about a 4'3" guy, and he's going to Georgia, bypassing all the schools on the West Coast. And he's doing it because maybe the culture thing. I don't know the whole answer, but when I read about what people are saying with culture, a lot of people are just deciding to go different routes, Big C. And I think that's part of it. I know a lot of people may have their opinion. They may agree or disagree, but it's still just my opinion. I wanted to bring that up as to why. So as we get into that, I just want to bring up the top 25 recruiting classes. And this whole program today is answering Big C's question. He says, Charlton, why are so many of California's top athletes going to the South? And Big C says it's because of the size of the school or because of the size of the stadium. I don't think that's all of it. I think it's some of it, but not all of it. Not every school in the South has 100,000 fans, and not every school in the South wins football games. But I can tell you, if all the schools line up in the SEC compared to the Pac-12, the cost of living is a lot cheaper in the South than it is on the West Coast. The major cities on the West Coast, they have college football programs. You can look at Tempe and Tucson, Arizona. Tempe is a suburb of Phoenix. Phoenix is not very I mean, it's integrated, but it's also a very segregated state. In Arizona, Phoenix is a more metropolitan city, but they have their issues too with race, and they took twice to get a Martin Luther King holiday in the great state of Arizona twice. Why? Doesn't make any sense. But they'll take the athletes because they'll go down there and play. If you're SEC cities, the real estate is not as expensive as going to USC or UCLA or Cal or Stanford or the University of Washington. More comfort-wise, I would say University of Oregon and maybe Washington State and Oregon State financially are more affordable, on par with some of the schools in the South, like Tuscaloosa or in Auburn, Alabama, or even Shreveport, LSU is Baton Rouge. So I think money is a big factor. That's why if a lot of people could afford $1 million home, I think they would. But if you're used to living in a house that costs $200,000, it's culture shock talking to people in real estate that come out to California. Some cities in the South, they could buy a 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom house for $200,000, and they have an acre of property. In California, that same 4-bedroom, 2 or 3-bathroom house would cost you nearly $1 million in the Bay Area or Southern California, and that's real. So Clemson, out of the ACC, they consider the number 1 ranked school in recruiting, and then you have number 2 Alabama out of the SEC, and considered number 2, number 3 Ohio State out of the Big Ten. Now listen to these schools that I name off. And you can also, I told you I went to a real estate meeting today, a big real estate meeting with one of the top real estate companies in the United States. And it's all about housing affordability. Number 3 on the list, Ohio State out of the Big Ten, the number 3 recruiting class in the country. Number 4, LSU out of the SEC. Yeah, they have 100,000 people, but it's also cheaper to buy a home. That's all a factor. And the culture there might be more integrated outside of the university than you have in, say, downtown Los Angeles or out in Stanford in the Stanford area. Just my thoughts. And even if they are integrated around Palo Alto, it's still a segregated kind of integration. They integrate around the sports programs, not necessarily in the neighborhoods. University of Georgia, and that's down there, I believe in Athens. That's SEC. They're the number 5 recruited program. I don't know how integrated Georgia is. I know Atlanta is a major hub for people of color, African Americans, and they have a school on the list too, in Georgia Tech at number 25. But I want to finish that list at Texas A&M, the number 6 recruited program with the top players in the country, SEC program number 7. Auburn University in the SEC, one of the top recruiting programs in the country. Cost of living is very affordable. Florida down in Gainesville, number 8 in the country. They're also the SEC. One of the top recruiting programs in the country. For the most part, a lot of their kids are African American, Big C. You can afford a house in Gainesville more so than Westwood, Los Angeles. So those things are factors. I think the Rose Bowl holds about 88,000 since they refigured it. It has more fans that they can put in at the Rose Bowl than they can down in Florida. But the cost of living is hardly affordable for a lot of people. I don't think it has a lot to do with the size of the stadium as much. It's just too expensive for a lot of people. And then when you go up north, you have Michigan, the number 9 recruiting class. That's in the Big Ten. Ann Arbor's a nice place. But I would say that it's more expensive to live in Westwood than it is to live in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Number 10, Oklahoma. Norman, Oklahoma. Real estate values compared to Los Angeles, California, or Santa Clara, California, not the same. So Oklahoma has been a breeding ground of top college football talent. So that's always going to help them too. Penn State, number 11 in the country, recruiting-wise, Big Ten. And then come out to the University of Washington. The top recruiting program in California is the University of Washington in the Pac-12. Even though Chris Peterson's stepping down, that area is very expensive. So that might be an anomaly compared. That's a lot like living in the Bay Area when you're in Seattle. Very expensive to buy a home in the city of Washington, but that university has a lot to offer. But again, a lot of their players come out of California. Now, I'm surprised that Notre Dame, I'm not surprised that they're on the list, but the number 13 recruiting class, everyone used to say that everybody wanted to go to Notre Dame. They're the number 13 recruiting team in the country. They're still an independent conference for football. So they've lost a little bit of that luster. A lot of people are even leaving Notre Dame to go to the South. And Notre Dame is known as a prestigious school. They're a private university, great education. But for the most part, they will go out and recruit the top African American talent too. They just do. I don't know how integrated South Bend is, but I know their football programs and basketball programs, you'll see a lot of integration for their programs, as we started off talking about the Revenge of the Titans and their late coach. So even Notre Dame is behind the West Coast program, Big C. So no one's saying, why are kids leaving, South Bend, Indiana to go south? But there are more kids on the West Coast that are staying that went to Washington than went to Notre Dame. So it's not as if Notre Dame's having a hard time keeping kids too. They're having a hard time getting kids to come there. We've named off at least, going back to the list, Notre Dame's 13 on the list, so 14 programs, 12 programs ahead of Notre Dame. Kids went south for the most part. SEC and ACC, a couple went to the Big Ten. So they're just like the West Coast. The top team on the West Coast for recruiting, Washington, they recruited at a higher level than Notre Dame. Tennessee, number 14 on the list, out of the SEC, tied with number 14, Oregon, out of the Pac-12. So just thinking about these kids that are going to different conferences, different regions of the country, Washington and Oregon recruited more kids out of California than any California top program. But again, the cost of living is a lot cheaper in Eugene and Seattle than Los Angeles and the Bay Area. And then also, as I just wanted to mention, Stanford University. Stanford's a little bit different breed of cat. Out of the Pac-12, there's 3 Pac-12 teams on that list. They're in the heart of Silicon Valley, Stanford University. The private school, you got to have a lot of money to get in there. I think even Emmitt Smith's son is going to the University of Stanford. David Shaw does a great job with that program. So that's just part of it. Everybody wants to just figure out reasons why kids will go from one region of the country to another. And I think to me, it's so important that we keep abreast of it. Tonight we have the Democratic debate, and people are going to talk about who's doing what in the country and how they feel they're going to make the United States better. I just say go out and vote. Whether the impeachment, the Democrats and the House and the Senate not getting along with Republicans, that's all fair and love and war. We've never seen anything like that. But I just wanted to give, my thoughts on why, when we ask why a lot of kids are leaving the West Coast, leaving California, going south, and you said it's stadiums, I said it's because of TV exposure. I think it's some of both. But I also think and again, everyone can do this program. You can do this own test. When you look at African Americans on TV, if you eliminated every sports program, there'd be no on ESPN, on Fox Sports, on CBS Sports, NBC Sports, ABC Sports. Every program has African American talent on those programs, on those platforms now, having our own shows, whether it's TV or radio. But if you go outside of the sports arena, you can probably count on one hand the number of African American hosts that will open up and anchor the news. It's not because they're not talented. Oftentimes you're not given the chance. As I said in this real estate meeting, about 200 people. There's a lady that she's a multimillionaire through real estate sales. She's Caucasian, and when she talked about doing listings and going into someone's home, something that a Caucasian person never has to think about is, do you pass the paperback test? And when people are dealing with white flight, they want to get away from integration. They want to get away from communities of color. They're not going to tell you publicly. But you look at what people do, not what they say. So if you're a Caucasian and you're trying to get that $1 million listing, they may feel more comfortable with you if you look like them. Because remember, they moved out of areas that were integrated to get away from diversity. Not because they want to live in a better neighborhood. There's a lot of neighborhoods that are great. But oftentimes, the reason you'll find a lot of Caucasians at the top of the food chain in real estate is because when they show up for the listing, they may look like the homeowner. If you don't believe that, just do your own test. How many times do you see people that look like you when you're doing your listing in your home? For the most part, as Caucasians, that's who they'll deal with. And there's probably 2% that will say, I'm open to anybody. But just looking at all the real estate magazines around the country, who do you see? What colors do you see? For the most part, you'll see people that can reflect that community. But out here in California, where it's considered diverse, there are only 2 African Americans at the meeting today, myself and another person. I want to just cover real quick in some NBA schedule. I know there's a lot of things going on in the world of NBA. We're going to do Big C's, NFL rundown tomorrow. In the Eastern Conference Atlantic Division, Philadelphia's on top, and followed by Boston. Philadelphia is 20-8, Boston 17-7. In the Southeast Division, Miami is 19-8, followed by Orlando, 2 good old teams from the state of Florida at the top of the Southeast Division. In the Central Division, Milwaukee Bucks and the LA Lakers. In the Western Conference, Dallas 18-8, with the Houston Rockets at 18-9. Big games coming up for Houston tonight. Northwest Division, Denver at 17-8, Utah at 16-11. In the Pacific Division, you have the LA Lakers at 24-4 and the LA Clippers. And my goodness, they have a big game tonight. Looking forward to that one. I want to say that you can follow Big C Sports 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on the #1 podcast network in the universe, iHeartRadio Podcast. You can follow Big C Sports on Apple Podcasts. You can follow Big C Sports on Google Podcasts. You can follow Big C Sports on Spreaker.com. The apps that I really love are by Google and Alexa. Just say Google or Alexa, play Big C Sports Podcast. You will hear from our sponsors. You'll hear welcome to the show. I will introduce Big C as the Mystic, and he'll do his thing, and I really appreciate the way things are going with Big C Sports. Also, you can follow Big C Sports on Xfinity Comcast Television, watch it on Roku TV, Apple TV, Fire TV, and a lot of smart TVs all over the universe. Tonight's schedule, Utah Jazz at the Atlanta Hawks, the LA Lakers at the Milwaukee Bucks. Could this be a preview of the NBA Finals? You have, of course, LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and Giannis Antetokounmpo. Will Giannis do what LeBron James decided to do? LeBron James went to Cleveland, wanted greener pastures. He went down to the South and went to Miami, played for the Miami Heat, came back to Cleveland, and then where did he go? He came to the West Coast. So, Big C, unlike a lot of the college, high school players going south, LeBron came to the West Coast, just like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar or Lou Alcindor came to the West Coast and played for the Lakers. That's just a game that you got to see. I don't know who's going to win it. I know both teams are at the top of the food chain. It should be great TV theater. And I look forward to, I would say, because Milwaukee's at home, they might have the advantage, but I think the Lakers have the better team. Brooklyn at San Antonio. And then Houston can't stop James Harden. Nobody can stop James Harden. They're playing against LA's second team in the LA Clippers. I know the Clippers want to replace King James as the team to see in Los Angeles, but I don't know if anybody can replace the mighty Lakers and what they do in Los Angeles. But it's a matter of saying, do you want to go out and watch good basketball? It's definitely there to go see. And James Harden, probably the best shooter we've ever seen in the world of basketball over the last decade or two. I mean, just no matter what you think about other players in other eras, there's something about him that people have to just write home and say, I love everything about this guy. And when it comes down to having a guy with the ball in his hand, I would trust James Harden to take the last shot over everybody, even LeBron James. I just think he's that dynamic, and everybody has their own, love-hate relationship with the Lakers. Sometimes when you have too much success, that makes people not like you. I've never really understood that, but I can kind of see why sometimes people just don't want to be ancillary to someone they're next to. That's why people move out of certain neighborhoods, and sometimes that's why people move out of certain school districts. It's all fair and love and war, but I just want to see the best of all that we have to offer in the world of sports, and I think we're going to see that tonight. A preview, really, if at least I would say the Western Conference Finals, it would be great for TV to have the Lakers and the Clippers, just because they're the best two. I know Houston at some point in time, they want to crack that door. They want to open that door and get in, like Bum Phillips says. He used to say that with the Houston Oilers back in the way. They never quite got that door kicked in. They were always winning up against the Dolphins or the Steelers. And I'd love to see if the Houston Rockets can crack that door. But not this year. I still want to see the Lakers and the Clippers. And on the East, it would be great just to see Milwaukee in there and to see Milwaukee and Philadelphia. I think Boston's had their go at it. To see Joel Embiid against Giannis, that would be, to me, great theater for people to see. Everybody has their own fair choice. Again, you can follow Big C Sports, and I hope that people can just do their own research. Is integration happening in this country outside of sports? If we did not have sporting programs on television, Would we see African Americans on TV? Probably could count them in the palm of your hand. I don't know. I love integration. That's why we have Big C Sports. We don't want to wait for anyone, and we want to create it ourselves. And that's why I always tell you, just Google it for yourself, and everyone wants the same opportunities. You can follow Big C Sports 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on the #1 podcast network in the universe, iHeartRadio Podcast. You can follow Big C Sports on Apple Podcasts. You can follow Big C Sports on Google Podcasts. You can follow Big C Sports on all the applications in the universe. And as we always tell you, back in the day, there was a man by the name of Drew Boudini Brown. He was known as Muhammad Ali's right-hand man, and he would always tell Ali, with all you got to use, how can you lose? Rumble, young men, rumble. And as I always say, Big C, what are you looking forward to in this boys universe? I wish everyone a very happy holiday season. And as we always tell you, there's never, ever an excuse for domestic violence. If you know any man or woman going through that garbage, please pick up the phone and call 911, because no man or woman should ever have to go through that garbage on their own. And as we always tell you on every Big C Sports show, we thank you, we appreciate you, and we hope that you have a super fantastic day.